Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
Book 3 of the Wolfman Chronicles. This is Chapter 3 of Book 3. Evidence is the title. We're in Montana. I crouch low to the ground, every fiber of my being tuned to the surrounding silence of the night, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and distant call of the night birds. My heart pounds in my chest, each beat a thunderous echo. My ears prick forward, straining to catch the slightest sound, the snap of a twig, the crunch of a footfall on fallen leaves, the sight of headlights coming up the road, or the sound of wheels crunching the dirt and the rock. Instinct urges me to flee, to disappear into the shadows and leave this place of danger behind. But a deeper part of me knows that running only confirms my status as prey to whomever or whatever's hunting me. So I remain, nearly motionless, survival of an animal that only recently have I begun to fully understand. Every nerve is on edge, every sense heightened to its utmost. The scent of humans hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the wet grass and the moist dirt beneath my 4 feet. Humans, wolves, the hunter, and the hunted. I am locked in a timeless dance of life and death. The long and winding road between Brandon's ranch and Jack's ran alongside fenced pastures where cows and horses grazed or stood sleeping. Their nostrils flared as they picked up the scent of the wolf, way too close for comfort. Cows brought their calves in close, horses whinnied and dug at the soil with their hooves ready to flee. The smell of a wolf meant danger. But this wolf was not interested in stealing a newborn calf that had strayed too far from the mama. This wolf had one lone thought in mind: stay out of the sight of humans. The wolf ran along the road for a mile, then jumped a fence and ran through a pasture to the safety of the trees that grew alongside the river. He would follow the river another few miles as it snaked through the ranch land, then cross over the rocky slope and down into the canyon, across the meadows and the forest lands till he reached his destination, the Moore Cattle Ranch. He didn't like being in wolf form this close to the ranches for fear of being shot. Twice already he had to crouch down very low to the ground in an attempt to blend in with the underbrush as he saw headlights approaching down the road. The ranchers around here did not like wolves, not one bit. They'd swerve out of their way to hit a wolf if they saw one in the road. And the ranchers carried rifles in their pickups, loaded and ready to take aim if they saw one in the distance. Wolves and cattlemen do not mix. If he followed the road, it was at least 11 miles to his place from Brandon's. But as the crow flies, or the wolf runs, it was closer to 7 miles. Now closer still if the river didn't cut right through the middle of it. In hard winters, the river would be mostly frozen and you could cross it, but the deep snows had not yet hit Montana and the water was deep and cold. There was only a few places where a wolf could safely cross. Still, it was important to get to the ranch tonight, before the sheriff's cleanup crew had a chance to scrub away every last bit of evidence. Jack needed to know for himself if the murders had been done by humans or werewolf, and the only way he could know for sure would be to smell the smells left behind, using his canine ability to pick up scents, and his human nose just would not do it. Finally, he was at the last stretch of his journey. The ranch buildings were in sight now down in the valley. As he crested the rocky ridge, he could see the road leading up to the house. It was dark, no lights on, no trucks parked in the driveway. He loped on down the rocky terrain, crossed the meadow, and came up to the back of the ranch house, cautiously, even though he could hear no sounds or anyone or anything close by. Smelling the ground near the house, he picked up several scents. There were urine smells from the dogs peeing on bushes near the side of the house. There was rabbit droppings, horse and cow dung that had stuck to someone's boots, a cigarette butt, and even a distinct cat-like smell of a young fox. It was not till he reached the front porch steps that he detected the smell of wolf. It was a feral smell, different from the domestic dog smell of the Australian shepherds that lived at the ranch. He followed the scent, step by step as it went up the steps of the porch, then turned abruptly and went along the walkway to the window. The wolf had apparently sniffed the window sills and even licked the far corner of the sill, where Jack could detect not only the scent of saliva, but also the scent of human blood. He followed the wolf's scent down the side of the porch where it leapt over a bush, landing with 4 feet on the ground. He followed the scent to the bunkhouse, where again the scent lingered at the door, then moved on around the building to the back of the house and on out into the pasture. Rather than following it any further, he turned and followed his nose back towards the buildings. He needed to get inside, in his wolf form, without the danger of an attack. Jack was fully wolf. He didn't entirely understand why there were times when he appeared half wolf, half man, but it seemed to happen when he was aggressively fighting. If he was not in immediate danger, his body assumed the full wolf form, which also meant that it was damn hard to open a door. Standing on the porch in the moonlight, Jack transformed himself back into a man. He had no clothes, obviously, but there was no one to notice. He did not, however, want to leave fingerprints or footprints on the floor, just in case any additional dusting was done before the cleanup crew removed the rest of the evidence. An old rag lying in the dirt of the circular driveway would work just fine. He found the hidden key under the loose floorboard, the same key he had hidden there just a few years before, and he used it with the rag to open the door handle and swing the door wide. And even though he wondered if he was being paranoid about the footprints, he went ahead and he assumed his wolf shape once again, just in case. If they were still dusting for prints, at least they still wouldn't be able to identify his, and it would help him detect scents as well. Now, once inside, he began sniffing the floorboards all around the room where Angus had been found hanging from the wagon wheel chandelier. Aside from the metallic smell of human blood, most likely Angus's, the scents were all human-made. There was the antiseptic smell of alcohol, the talcum and graphite-smelling powders of the dusting compounds, and the faint scent of men's aftershave, and a very strong and vaguely familiar scent of cologne. Men's cologne, he thought. He went through the room again. Nothing. Moving to the staircase, he smelled every step in the railing. A wolf, even a werewolf in half-man, half-wolf form, would have left some trace of smell if he'd have brushed against a railing on the way up or down the staircase. Again, nothing. He entered the bedroom where Angus's wife had been found. In his mind, he remembered the bloody bed sheets and the blankets. The bed had been soaked with blood. The smell of the room was permeated with that metallic scent of human blood, mixed with the sweet smell of cologne, shampoo, scented soaps, and the scent of men's cologne was much stronger in this room. He sniffed under the bed and all around the bed. The sickeningly sweet smell of men's cologne mixed with the smell of body sweat, intermingled with the smell of the blood. It was almost more than Jack could take. He wandered into the bathroom. Her perfume was strong in this room, a smell that was faintly citrus. The shampoo and scented soap was on her bath towel and the shower curtain. He noticed only one toothbrush in the sink holder. Wandering down the hall, he entered the second bedroom, the one he slept in when he lived in the house. Angus's wife had preferred the other room, the guest room as it was called, because it had floral sheets and large windows that looked out over the mountains. Jack had always preferred the darker room down the hall because it had dark oak paneling on the walls and looked out over the horse barn. Now, exploring the room, he could tell the bed had recently been slept in, and not by a woman. There were men's pants draped over the bed frame, and the pungent smell of Men's sweat mixed with the smell of leather and horse. Angus must have been sleeping in this room. The blankets had been thrown over the pillows, and Jack gently nuzzled them back, smelling the pillow underneath. Yes, this was where Angus had been sleeping. He entered the bathroom. There was a razor, a toothbrush, soap scum, the toilet lid was up. There was no men's cologne or aftershave, only a container of unscented deodorant. With nothing more to smell in this room, he went back into Trixie's room. It was strange but not unusual for a married man and woman to sleep in separate bedrooms, Jack thought, but there was something that was bothering him. He sniffed the floorboards once again, the door frame, the hallway entering the room. There was no feral smell, just the scent of blood, cologne, and sweat, a man's sweat. Jack left the main house and headed for the bunkhouse. It was cumbersome, but Jack had to become a man again to open this door handle as well. The hidden key above the door frame was still there, so he let himself in. Now the smells of the bunkhouse were overwhelming. Dust, decaying food that had been left uneaten on plates in the kitchen, black coffee left in cups, the scent of the dogs mixed with the smell of horses and cattle and leather. There was a smell of straw and peanuts and beef jerky, but over and above all the other scents, there was the strong metallic scent of blood. It was everywhere. The scent seemed to permeate the air. The bunkhouse consisted of a large living and dining room with a kitchen off to one side, several bedrooms on the main floor with stairs leading up to a loft with several more bedrooms. The house could accommodate a staff of 10 to 12 ranch hands at any one time. Many cowboys worked at the ranch year-round, but a few came on board just at calving or branding time. There was an additional cabin for the ranch foreman. Now, when Jack lived at the ranch, Angus and his soon-to-be wife lived in the small cabin. But since Jack had spent so many months away in the past few years, he had asked Angus to move into the main house as ranch manager. The photos the sheriff had shown Jack of the scene before the bodies had been removed showed complete chaos in the room. Chairs were upturned, parts of bodies strewn over the table, the beds, the floor. One thing Jack couldn't figure out is why there was no smell of gunpowder in the room. If something or someone had entered this room and started attacking the men, someone would have pulled out a gun and shot at the beast. Jack also noticed there were no whiskey glasses, beer bottles, or anything else like that laying around the room. Now, his men were not drunks, but they did like having a drink or two after a hard day's work. None of this made sense. As he looked around, he began to think the whole scene looked like something out of the movies. The props were in all the right places, yet it all seemed to be so perfectly laid out. Suddenly, Jack heard a noise outside. He crouched low. He perked his ears forward, picking up the direction of the sound. Now only silence. He waited several seconds, then moved towards the door, as softly and quietly as he could. Standing just inside the open door, his ears picked up the sound again. There were definite footfalls from a creature just within hearing range. Now, it could be a deer, he thought. Then he picked up the smell, the musky, sultry scent of a female wolf. He waited, listening to it as it approached the bunkhouse, then turned and padded softly back into the night. Jack came out onto the bunkhouse porch and looked off into the trees, rising his head up to pick up her scent. Oh, she was gone. Morning would come soon. Jack closed the doors and put the keys back in their hiding places and began the journey back to Brandon's. It was almost morning when Jack gathered his clothes up he had left behind Brandon's barn. It had been another sleepless night. As he walked around the corner of the barn, he noticed Brandon's pickup was not in the driveway. The kitchen light was on. Now, Lynn had already made a pot of coffee. "You're up early," she said to Jack as he walked in the front door. "Al, I couldn't sleep. I went out for an early morning walk. Man, that coffee sure does smell good." "Chicory. It's the best coffee, you know," Lynn replied as she poured him a cup. "Lynn, something's bothering me about this whole business," Jack sighed. "Well, actually, a lot's bothering me about the mayhem out at the ranch." Nothing makes sense. Not the way they were killed, nor the handling of all this by the sheriff. Is there something you can tell me that might help me figure this thing out?" Lynn looked down at her coffee cup for a few long moments. "Jack, there are things that Brandon is trying to figure out right now. In fact, he left for town early this morning because he's gathered some evidence on who might be responsible for all this. I really can't tell you anything, as much as I'd like to. I have to leave this to Brandon. You understand, don't you, Jack?" "No, I don't understand anything at all, Lynn, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable. If you say Brandon is on to something, I just hope he'll come clean with me when he returns." "He will," Lynn replied. "He promised me he'll tell you today. But Jack, be careful, and please don't confide in the sheriff. There's something not square about him, and I don't want to say anything else, but just don't trust him, Jack. Not with anything that might get used against you." Jack nodded his head. "Okay, Lynn, listen. I've had a rough night. I'm going to go lay down for a bit. Miguel will be arriving later today, and I want to take him out to the ranch later. When Brandon comes home, please wake me." Lynn walked over and gave Jack a hug. "I will, Jack, I promise. As soon as Brandon gets back, I'll cook you some breakfast and make another pot of coffee. You go get some rest." Well, Miguel had rented a Ford F-150 from the car rental place, chuckling to himself that the only vehicles on the lots were trucks. We are in cowboy country. Miguel laughed when he signed his rental agreement. The clerk behind the counter explained that they normally had cars in stock in the summer, but through the winter all they had were SUVs and pickup trucks. All of our vehicles are four-wheel drive, and this time of year there might not be much snow around here yet, but you just wait a few weeks. It's a-comin'. Miguel was glad for the clear roads and the blue sky. He hadn't been to Yellowstone in years, and Bozeman had always been one of his favorite towns. He had thought about moving there in the past until he'd spent a winter with a girlfriend and saw just how cold and snowy it could get. That sent him running right back to Mexico. When he'd known Jack as a boy, he'd been invited out to the family ranch in Big Sky. But he'd never made it there. Now Jack's parents were gone, and Jack had taken over the ranch. It was a damn shame that the ranch would now be forever known as the Moore Massacre Ranch, or some other such nonsense. The drive to Big Sky was beautiful and quick. It only took 3.5 hours. Now Miguel was pulling into the long driveway of Brandon and Lynn's ranch. Lynn was pacing the floor waiting for Brandon to return when she saw the white Ford truck pull into the driveway and a handsome Hispanic man step out. She went to the door. "You must be Miguel," she said as she walked down the porch steps and out onto the driveway, holding out her hand to shake his. "And you must be Lynn," Miguel said, ignoring her outstretched hands and wrapping her in a big old bear hug. "Thank you for being such a kind host to my brother," he laughed. Lynn smiled. "Come on inside, I'll go get Jack." She set him down at the kitchen table and poured him a cup of coffee. "Now make yourself at home. There's milk in the fridge, there's sugar there in the cupboard. Jack's upstairs, so I'll be back in a minute." It didn't take long for Jack to bound downstairs in his excitement to see Miguel. "Miguel, it's good to see you." "Sleeping in like a baby? What the hell?" Miguel laughed as he gave Jack a big old bear hug and slapped him on the back. Jack grinned and looked over at Lynn. "You got that coffee ready, Lynn? I sure could use a cup." "You bet, Jack. You two sit down and get caught up. I've got to go out to the barn and tend to the horses, and I'm hoping Brandon will be home real soon." Lynn left the two men to talk in the kitchen. "Did you get out to the ranch last night?" Miguel asked him. "Yeah, I didn't find much, at least not what I was looking for. But I did detect a couple of strange scents that I'm curious about. It was the damnedest thing, though, Miguel. I covered every inch of that floor looking for that feral wolf smell that I'm so familiar with now. It just wasn't there. I don't know if it's faded that quickly or if they've cleaned up the floor enough not to smell it. Now, most of the blood has been cleaned up already, and they have a hazmat crew coming out later today to do a deep clean and remove all the stains. But I did pick up some other interesting smells." The sound of truck tires in the driveway halted their conversation. "Brandon's here." He looked out the kitchen window and could see Lynn standing at Brandon's truck. "Do you want me to leave for a bit?" Miguel asked. "No, stay. Whatever he has to say, you can hear it too. I already told Brandon you were here to help me sort this all out." A few minutes later, Brandon and Lynn walked in the door together. Brandon carried a box marked Overnight Express under his arm. Lynn refilled everyone's coffee cup and cut them all a big slice of apple pie she had made that morning. She sat down at the table with the three men. Reaching inside the box, Brandon pulled an envelope out and set it on the kitchen table. "Listen, Jack, I'm sorry I didn't tell you this sooner, but I had to be sure we had proof before I brought this up to you. And before I show you what I have in this here envelope, I want to tell you how I acquired these. Now, I've had a suspicion that something was going on out there at your ranch for a while now. I started looking into it a few months ago. Well, Lynn's sister that lives out in San Francisco is married to a private investigator, and he works for large corporations investigating fraud and embezzlement cases mostly. Well, Lynn told her sister Janine about my suspicions, and Janine told her husband. He called me a couple weeks ago and said Janine's been itching to see her big sister and they wouldn't mind a little vacation out here in Montana. He said he'd be willing to help me do a little investigating while they were out here. Jack, I opened up a can of worms." He paused and his eyes filled with tears. "I went out to talk to Angus about it and he got really nervous. Said I was putting my nose into business where it didn't belong. He told me to keep my mouth shut so nothing would happen to me or Lynn. Well, I came home and thought about it, and I discussed it with Lynn, and we just decided to hold off doing anything or telling everyone till we had more proof. Nobody knew that Lynn's brother-in-law was doing all this background investigation for me. So then you called and asked me to go out and check on Angus, so I did. And you know what I found out there. So Lynn's brother-in-law, Scott, has gathered the proof we need, and he overnighted it to me. Now, I haven't wanted to call him over this phone line or my cell phone, so that's why I went into town so early today so I could use a public telephone. They still have one of those at the gas station in town. Then I had to wait for the post office to open and sort their packages before I could get this." And he pushed the envelope across the table to Jack. Jack pulled out a stack of photographs and a document. The first photograph was of Sheriff and Angus leaning against the sheriff's truck talking. The photograph had been taken with a telescopic lens from quite a far distance. The second photo was a drone shot of Jack's ranch. Normally, Jack ran about 200 head of cows on his 8,000-acre ranch, but there were easily 4 times that amount held in the bottom pasture, to the point where it looked like a feedlot. "What the hell?" Jack expressed out loud. "Them ain't my cows." The next photograph was another drone shot taken at night. Cows were being loaded into a long line of cattle trucks lining Jack's driveway. "You know, you have to drive right by my ranch to get to yours. I started noticing a lot of cattle trucks moving through here at all times of the day and the night. I've known you for a long time, Jack, but I know when your cattle go to market, and this didn't seem right. So I drove out to ask Angus about it, and that's when he told me to mind my own business. A couple of days later, I just happened to run into the sheriff at Mary's Diner, and I just sort of haphazardly asked if he'd noticed all the activity out on Moore Ranch. He had all sorts of questions about what I'd seen and how many trucks I thought were going by. He said he'd do some investigating. Next thing I know, Angus is strung up and all your ranch hands is dead. Like I said before, I called the sheriff first, then I called you. Well, afterwards, I called Scott to tell him the news. Now, he told me to watch my back around that sheriff, that something suspicious was going on, and he thought maybe the sheriff was in on it. Well, I didn't see how that could possibly be, so I didn't want to mention that to you. Scott said he was sending some evidence." Jack continued looking through the photos. Several pictures showed the sheriff talking with someone in a red pickup truck. Paper clipped to the photo was a police bulletin showing a close-up of the guy. He was a known drug trafficker, wanted by the FBI. Jack looked at the document he had pulled from the envelope. It was an article clipped from the online news agency. It was titled Contraband Cattle Moving from Mexico into the U.S. In a complex cattle laundering system, hundreds of cattle are being moved illegally across the border into holding facilities across Texas, Arkansas, Wyoming, and Montana. Unmarked and without the branding of any particular transport company, these trucks roll down our nation's highways filled with as many cattle as can stand with barely enough room to move or breathe. Dozens of emaciated cattle in poor health are destined for feedlots where they will be sold to processing plants and turned into beef byproducts, mostly for use in pet foods. But the worst part of this scenario is the cattle themselves are being used as a means of moving cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and other illegal drugs across the border. Cattle smuggling is an effect of the globalization of the beef industry. Following the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement, that's NAFTA, in 1994, Mexico's exports of cattle and beef to the United States grew. While the export of cattle is not illegal in and of itself, all cattle must come from certified ranches, wear identification tags with which they are tracked from birth until slaughter, and they must have all the proper health certificates. Well, cattle traffickers use informal crossings to sidestep the controls mentioned above and don't carry the required official documentation. But in order for the cattle to be sold to large producers and meat companies in the U.S., they need to appear in the national registries and must have an ear tag that identifies them as being certified in Mexico. To comply, cattle traffickers seek out the services of black market ear tag marketeers. The national system of individual cattle identification is in charge of providing ear tags for all cattle in Mexico that will be transported to the U.S. Working directly with local cattle ranchers' unions, they sell ear tags to what are called livestock production units, or properties where ranchers have their cattle registered. Here, only a certified veterinarian can place ear tags on the cattle before they are transferred by truck to the U.S. The tags carry a unique code, allowing the government to track all the places the cattle have been transferred through from birth to slaughter. However, there is a thriving black market for such identification markers. There are several ways in which ear tags can be obtained. Some cattle union officials or veterinarians will sell the ear tags under the table directly to traffickers. Now, ranchers may also falsify the number of cattle they own in order to obtain an excess of ear tags, which they can then sell to those transporting contraband cattle. The Mexican government estimates as many as $18 million worth of ear tags are sold on the black market each year. And, as disturbing as it sounds, many of these cows are being used as drug mules, smuggling illegal drugs packed inside their body cavities. After reading this, Jack just shook his head. I have a hard time believing Angus was in on this. I spent my career as a brand inspector. I have a database of every ear tag in the state of Montana. Angus knows how I would feel about this. Brandon looked at Jack. That's why I begin to suspect the sheriff, Jack. There's big money in this, more money than you'd ever get on a sheriff's salary. And of all the ranches in this state, the last one anyone would suspect would be yours. I think the sheriff forced Angus to comply. And that's why I needed Scott to get the background info on the sheriff. We're all too close a community around here, and if he had Angus and your guys killed, there's a good chance he'd do the same thing to Lynn and me. When I called you that night, right after I found Angus, the first thing he asked me is if I'd contacted you. I told him I was about to. He said, "Good, get him out here." I didn't think anything of it, but now I'm wondering if he's trying to set you up as the fall guy. It is your ranch, after all. If they've been smuggling cattle and drugs through your property, you're the one they'd be looking for. But why, he said. Why do you think he'd have Angus and the guys killed? That doesn't make sense to me. And maybe he's just working undercover or something like that, Jack replied. Well, there's more. Brandon pulled out another envelope and passed it over to Jack. Inside it were several more photographs. Sheriff Buck Brady was having an affair with Angus's wife, Trixie. There were photos of the two of them in his truck. Another of two of them meeting at a hotel the next county over. Another showing the two of them in each other's arms. Poor Angus. He loved that woman. Okay, so we think the sheriff's a shady character, possibly involved in the contraband cattle operation. Maybe there's drugs involved, and he may have been using my ranch as his front. And possibly Angus found out about the two of them. And that might explain why Angus was killed. But if Buck was having an affair with Trixie, then why would she be killed, or all my guys? Well, Jack, it gets stranger yet. Brandon pulled another envelope of photographs out of the box.